On August 22, 2025, in a suburb of Guadalajara, in the area known as Colonia San Andrés, a gray pickup truck was discovered abandoned beside an auto repair shop. Inside the bed of the truck were 4 bodies, each wrapped in plastic sheeting. The vehicle stood in front of the repair building, which forced responding units to seal off the perimeter and call in forensic teams immediately. When prosecutors from Jalisco arrived, they photographed the scene, documented trace evidence, and collected material samples for forensic pathology and trace evidence analysis. The layout of the remains inside the truck bed, the manner of wrapping, and the design elements of the pickup all led experts to conclude the bodies had been placed in the vehicle after death. An external inspection of the truck showed no evidence the engine had been running recently. And while there was some damage to the body panels, no media outlets reported that the truck had been intentionally burned or otherwise altered to hide evidence. The preliminary documentation allowed the possibility that the crime occurred either inside the repair shop or at another location, with the bodies then moved later. Security personnel and patrol officers at the site noted that no obvious eyewitnesses had come forward, and the first people who reported the suspicious vehicle were passers-by or nearby residents. Shortly thereafter, specialized teams, crime scene investigators, forensic technicians, DNA specialists, and medical examiners arrived and began a full, systematic documentation of the scene. The medical examiners observed that the bodies showed no signs of decomposition at the time of discovery and that the wrapping was done neatly, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal evidence. Tools and equipment in the repair shop adjacent to the pickup, doors, gates, the driveway, and walls were also examined carefully. Once the area was cordoned off, prosecutors announced the vehicle had been used for transporting human remains and declared the case would be handled as a homicide with body relocation. Officials did not initially release the identities of the deceased, instead concentrating on procedural matters, forensic measurements, DNA comparative samples, and analysis of materials from the truck bed. Public statements emphasized that the film wrap, packaging materials, trace marks on body parts, and microscopic residues on vehicle components would receive special scrutiny. The key challenge became tracing the source of the vehicle, reconstructing its path in the hours before its discovery, and immediately integrating surveillance camera footage along suspected routes. Response teams, traffic police, crime scene units, and video analysts began working to locate recordings that showed the truck's movement. Given that the auto shop is located in an urban area with potentially limited lighting, the task was not easy. Still, that aspect became the launching point for the entire investigation. After the vehicle and the bodies placed in the truck bed were taken by authorities, all remains were transported to the Forensic Medical Center in Guadalajara. There, the identification process began, which included fingerprint analysis, DNA comparison, and anthropological examination. The first official confirmation came a few days later when the Jalisco prosecutor's office verified the identities of all 4 individuals. According to the reports, they were a family who had recently lived in Guadalajara and previously had ties to the state of Michoacan. The woman was 32-year-old Esmeralda Ferrer Garibay. The man was 36-year-old Roberto Carlos Gil Licea, their 13-year-old son named Gael Santiago, and their 7-year-old daughter named Regina. The investigation was coordinated by local authorities with support from the Missing Persons Department. At first, officials considered the possibility that the deceased had been listed as missing, since the family had stopped making contact several days before the vehicle was found. Relatives living in Michoacan informed investigators that their last communication with the family took place just a few days before the tragedy. This helped narrow down the time frame of the disappearance. Forensic specialists conducted a full examination to determine the cause of death. Signs of aggressive behavior leading to death were documented on the remains, but specific details, such as the type of injuries, the sequence of impacts, and the mechanism of harm, were not officially released. Public reports only stated that the deaths occurred before the bodies were wrapped and transported. These circumstances led officials to classify the crime as a premeditated act followed by concealment of evidence. The identification process was complicated due to the condition of the remains and the method of packaging. But through comparison of medical records and biological samples from relatives, conclusive matches were confirmed. Based on the results, the Jalisco Prosecutor's Office sent a notice to the National Missing Persons Registry, officially removing the individuals from the list. After that, information about the family members was made public, allowing authorities to clarify the social and personal context of the incident. Further investigative steps included reconstructing the family's last known route, collecting statements from neighbors, and analyzing digital records. It became known that shortly before the tragedy, Esmeralda and her spouse were planning to move and were exploring options to expand their family business. These details were confirmed in interviews with people close to them, but no direct link between their business activities and the incident had been established at that time. The identification phase concluded with an official statement from the prosecutor's office, emphasizing that the case involved the entire family. On the same day, coordination began to transfer the remains to relatives for burial. Reports indicated that state forensic authorities preserved samples for possible additional testing, including toxicology and microscopic analysis. The confirmation of identity became a pivotal step, allowing investigators to move from establishing who the victims were to examining possible motives, circumstances of the deaths, and the family's connections in the region. Esmeralda Ferrer Garibay maintained an active digital presence, becoming well known in the Spanish-speaking segments of TikTok and Instagram for her short-form lifestyle videos. Her content focused on everyday purchases, travel clips, family moments, and casual glimpses into her daily routine. Since launching her account in 2020, she gradually built a loyal following that eventually reached tens of thousands. Her posts were known for their neutral, non-confrontational tone, avoiding political or controversial subjects. The main themes revolved around daily life, beauty routines, fashion trends, and simple home organization tips. Various sources provided slightly different follower counts, but all agreed that her page had seen steady growth and consistent viewer interest. Comments under her videos reflected strong audience engagement, with no signs of threats or contentious discussions. Based on archived social media data, her final posts before the family's disappearance were from mid-August 2025 and centered on everyday topics: cooking, relaxing, and shopping for her son and daughter. This gave investigators confidence that there were no red flags or alarming signals in her digital footprint before her death. Other platforms, including Facebook and YouTube, also had profiles connected to her, but TikTok remained her main outlet. Her videos were uploaded regularly, edited with standard visual effects, and included brief captions. There was no publicly available evidence of sponsored content or advertising deals. According to prosecutors, her online activity showed no signs of disputes, violations, or any requests for assistance from law enforcement. Alongside her content creation, Esmeralda used social media to stay in touch with relatives and friends. After her disappearance, these platforms became a key source for investigators trying to reconstruct her last days. Posts helped map out the family's travel routes, locations they frequented, and a rough timeline of their last internet activity. Cyber investigators traced signals from her phone up until mid-August, after which all digital connections ceased. Public interest in Esmeralda's profile spiked following the official confirmation of her death. Media outlets began compiling her videos to present a fuller picture of who she was, as a mother and content creator. This portrayal significantly shaped how the tragedy was perceived. What started as a regional story soon gained international attention. Despite the wide circulation of her content, investigators ruled out the possibility that her online visibility was a direct cause of the attack. Officials noted that none of her videos touched on sensitive topics or included provocative elements. The digital analysis portrayed her as a private citizen focused on family life and domestic themes, with no history of online conflicts. This became a critical piece of evidence reinforcing the theory that the motive behind the crime likely originated in real-world circumstances, possibly business-related or personal, rather than in the digital sphere. Esmeralda Ferrer Garibay's family came from the state of Michoacán, a region west of Mexico City known for its agriculture and frequent internal migration as people seek better economic opportunities. Esmeralda and her husband, Roberto Carlos Gil Licea, spent most of their lives there, working as entrepreneurs in the trade of agricultural goods and used vehicles. According to local sources, their income came from several streams: selling cars, transporting goods, and running a small farming business focused on growing tomatoes. These activities required frequent travel between Michoacan and the neighboring state of Jalisco, which gradually became their primary area of operation. The family's move to Guadalajara took place shortly before the tragedy, likely in the first half of 2025. According to acquaintances, they had plans to expand their business by renting warehouse space and establishing new connections with local suppliers. Guadalajara was seen as a more strategic location due to its logistics and access to larger markets. The family's new home was in a residential area with solid infrastructure. Gail and Regina were enrolled in a nearby school, and Esmeralda continued her online activity, now sharing content from their new location. Neighbors described the family as quiet and well integrated in the community. They kept a low profile, had no legal issues, and weren't under any sort of local law enforcement observation. However, the region of Jalisco has seen increased crime levels in recent years, creating challenges for families involved in independent business ventures. Experts noted that the move from Michoacan to Guadalajara may have been driven not only by economic goals, but also by concerns over personal safety, although no formal statements were made on that point. Following the incident, investigators examined the family's travel routes between the two states, cross-referencing footage from security cameras and bank transactions. The last financial activity was recorded a few days before their deaths. There were no signs of outstanding debts or legal disputes. Vehicle ownership and property records were consistent with standard registrations. Relatives living in Michoacan told the prosecutor's office that Esmeralda kept in regular contact and had not expressed any concerns about threats. In one interview, family members shared that the couple was actively working on developing their business and considering formal registration. These details helped investigators build a picture of their circumstances leading up to the incident, showing no signs of crisis or interpersonal conflict. The combination of a stable home life, absence of debt, and a well-planned move allowed authorities to rule out motives linked to internal disputes or everyday domestic causes. At the same time, relocating to a new region placed the family in contact with a new circle of business partners, property owners, and intermediaries. This aspect of Esmeralda and Roberto's life, their adjustment to Jalisco, eventually drew the attention of investigators as a potential point of contact with individuals who may have later become involved in the crime. After the identification process was completed, the Jalisco State Prosecutor's Office officially confirmed the launch of a criminal investigation into the deaths of 4 members of the same family. Initial strategy meetings were held behind closed doors, bringing together experts in forensic science, pathology, and analysts specializing in organized crime. Investigators outlined several primary directions for inquiry based on the evidence gathered at the scene where the vehicle was found. The main focus centered on the business activities of the late Roberto Carlos Gil Licea, Esmeralda's husband. Official records showed he worked in the sale of used vehicles and agricultural products, which would have required regular interactions with brokers and transport companies. The prosecutor's office classified the crime as deliberate and planned. Potential motives under review included financial disputes, interference in business arrangements, or involvement in non-transparent deals. Another avenue of inquiry focused on the possibility of outside criminal involvement, with individuals potentially aiming to take over assets or intimidate the family. Authorities did not rule out the possibility that the crime could have involved individuals linked to regional groups that influence trade and transport routes. Investigation teams began working closely with the family's social circle. Interviews were conducted with acquaintances, neighbors, and business partners. At this stage, no clear evidence of threats, personal disputes, or pressure was identified. However, prosecutors emphasized that the inquiry would also cover the period prior to the family's relocation, as unresolved obligations may have originated there. To clarify their financial landscape, Data was requested from banks, logistics companies, and property registries. Alongside the review of business operations, investigators examined the family's last known day before disappearing. Surveillance footage captured their vehicle in transit, but the moment of the crime was not recorded. This led investigators to believe that the act may have occurred inside a closed space or secluded area, after which the bodies were moved into the truck. Forensic teams concentrated on gathering DNA and microparticle evidence that could have been left behind by those involved. In an official statement, the Jalisco prosecutor's office noted there were no signs of robbery, missing valuables, or staged evidence at the scene. The lack of disturbance inside the vehicle pointed to a controlled and organized action by the individuals involved. Reports indicated a likely group effort, with roles possibly pre-assigned. Some media outlets speculated that the crime could be tied to organized criminal groups, but prosecutors maintained a neutral stance, describing it only as an investigation into possible financial interests. Officials emphasized that drawing premature conclusions could hinder the investigation. At that point, no formal charges had been filed against any individuals. By mid-September, investigative teams expanded the scope of their analysis, comparing the case against a database of similar incidents in the region. They identified past cases that involved similar wrapping materials and the transport of remains, leading to the hypothesis that the crime may have been carried out by individuals with prior experience, possibly professionals. Despite limited physical evidence, the authorities worked under the assumption that those responsible operated with a high level of coordination. At this stage, the investigation took on a comprehensive form, combining forensic findings, financial records, and digital data retrieved from the victims' devices. Prosecutors reported that the top priority remained identifying the motive and determining who had interacted with the family in the days leading up to their deaths. After documenting the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the vehicle, investigators shifted focus to tracing the movements of the pickup truck, which had become the central element of the case. The goal was to reconstruct the vehicle's route from the time the family went missing to when it was eventually found parked outside an auto repair shop in the San Andrés neighborhood. To accomplish this, a specialized analytical team was assembled, including video surveillance analysts, forensic trace experts, and GPS system specialists. Prosecutors in Jalisco requested footage from city surveillance cameras located along major roadways and matched that data with timestamp records from the mobile devices belonging to the family. Early results from the analysis indicated that the vehicle traveled from a residential area toward the eastern part of the city, an area known for its industrial buildings and workshops. Cameras captured the truck at several intersections, but footage from the final segment of the route was missing. This led investigators to believe that the last few miles were either outside camera range or driven by someone else. Given that the truck was parked in an orderly manner, investigators concluded that whoever was behind the wheel had sufficient time and was not acting under pressure or being followed. Inside the repair shop next to where the truck was found, forensic teams discovered biological traces consistent with the victims. Some sources also mentioned the presence of shell casings, bloodstains, and signs of a recent cleanup. These clues supported a working theory that the crime may have taken place inside the workshop, and the remains were later placed in the truck for removal. Investigators collected samples from tools, surfaces, and clothing found inside the building. The prosecutor's office confirmed that DNA tests showed partial matches, although some material had been degraded. Even so, the results helped outline a timeline. The deaths likely occurred inside a closed space, followed by the movement of the bodies, and eventually the truck was left parked outside the shop. Additional soil disturbances and footprints at the scene suggested that more than one individual may have been involved. Forensic reports also noted that the wrapping materials used were the kind typically found in automotive settings, further linking the location to the incident. Authorities determined that the building in question was used by independent mechanics and lacked permanent oversight. This made identifying responsible individuals more difficult. All registered renters were interviewed, and a few workers were detained for questioning but released soon after, due to insufficient evidence. Prosecutors stated that witness statements were inconsistent. Some claimed the truck arrived during the night, while others believed it had been there since the morning. One key focus of the investigation was the time frame between the crime and the discovery of the truck. Forensic examination revealed that the victims had died only a few hours before the vehicle was reported, indicating a very short transport window. Investigators reconstructed a likely route and proposed that the perpetrators used dimly lit roads and access points to industrial facilities. The analytical team identified several cameras that may have captured footage along this path, and the recordings were collected for closer review. Tracing the truck's route became one of the most critical parts of the case. Using the compiled data, prosecutors built a timeline: the family's disappearance, the truck's movement, its final route, and its parking near the repair shop. Each phase was documented using both digital records and physical evidence. Although the exact location where the crime occurred had not been confirmed, the evidence strongly suggested that the key events unfolded in an industrial zone where city surveillance was limited. After investigators identified the likely location where the crime took place, their attention turned to individuals who had access to the auto repair shop near where the pickup truck was discovered. The shop was being used by a group of independent mechanics who operated without formal business registration. The building's owner had rented out the space to multiple tenants, often through informal agreements, making it harder to determine who exactly had access to the site. The Jalisco prosecutor's office announced the detention of 3 men who had been working at the property, bringing them in for questioning as persons of interest. Their identities were not publicly disclosed, but it was reported that they were present at the location before authorities arrived and claimed they had no knowledge of the truck parked near the entrance. During questioning, the men stated that the truck had appeared overnight, left there by unknown individuals, and that they found it in that position the next morning. Forensic specialists examined their clothing and vehicles, but no direct evidence was found linking them to the crime. Within days, prosecutors released a statement confirming that the men had been released from custody due to insufficient evidence. However, they remained under procedural supervision. Around the same time, reports began surfacing in the media suggesting that some of the individuals questioned, or others connected to the shop, had been targeted in follow-up incidents. Multiple sources claimed that shortly after interacting with law enforcement, one of the workers had been the victim of an attempted abduction. Another individual reported being followed. Prosecutors did not publicly comment on these events, but local security officials confirmed that threats to witnesses were being treated as credible and possibly linked to organized networks seeking to suppress evidence. As a precaution, authorities enhanced protection measures for those involved in the investigation. Personnel from the Witness Protection Unit were assigned, though some individuals declined to cooperate further due to safety concerns. According to internal reports, several witnesses left the region entirely, opting to give statements remotely. These developments slowed the pace of the investigation and made gathering new evidence more challenging, as many aspects of the case required in-person witness corroboration. In light of these threats, the prosecutor's office revised its media strategy, limiting the release of case details. Updates were issued in a generalized format, omitting names and addresses to reduce risk to those involved. Additional security protocols were implemented for search teams, as it became increasingly clear that the crime appeared to involve an organized group and required coordinated planning by multiple individuals. Interviews with people connected to the repair shop revealed conflicting timelines. Some witnesses claimed the truck had been parked there the day before the bodies were discovered. Others insisted it appeared suddenly during the night. Descriptions of individuals seen in the area varied, and surveillance footage from nearby cameras was inconclusive due to poor lighting, preventing facial identification. Investigators concluded that the truck was likely delivered swiftly, with assigned roles among the group, suggesting a level of coordination consistent with a professionally executed crime. Despite the lack of direct evidence, the theory that individuals from the shop may have been involved was not entirely dismissed. They remained under observation, and biological samples taken from the scene were sent for reanalysis. Investigators also began reviewing possible ties between these individuals and contacts in Michoacán and Guadalajara, including connections to auto parts suppliers. As a result, this phase of questioning and detainment confirmed that the crime showed signs of being organized, though the specific individuals responsible had not yet been identified. Following the official confirmation of the victims' identities, the tragic case of Esmeralda Ferrer Garibay and her family sparked a massive public response. News of the crime quickly spread through regional and national outlets and soon reached international media, with summaries appearing in both Spanish and English. Early reports focused on the discovery of the vehicle and the revelation that one of the victims was a well-known social media personality. This detail became a key driver of media attention, as the tragedy involved someone who had a visible online presence and was widely seen as a symbol of everyday family life. Social media reacted swiftly to announcements from the prosecutor's office. Users began sharing hashtags to express condolences and demand justice. Esmeralda's previous posts became flooded with comments, turning her profile into a kind of digital memorial. Platforms recorded a surge in views of her videos, and in several Latin American countries, the story became part of daily news roundups. In Mexico, news outlets highlighted the broader context, namely a pattern of attacks in recent years targeting public figures and business owners. Reporters noted that many of these cases remained unresolved, with investigations often hampered by limited resources and threats to witnesses. On a federal level, some officials called for increased protections for individuals involved in public-facing work, although authorities clarified that social media presence alone isn't typically seen as a risk factor. Despite the growing public interest, the prosecutor's office maintained strict control over information. Officials issued only brief statements confirming the progress of investigative steps without disclosing any interim conclusions. This measured approach was intended to protect the integrity of the case and prevent leaks that could affect witness testimony or compromise evidence. Internationally, the story began appearing in English-language tabloids and major news platforms, where the case was sometimes compared to other high-profile incidents involving bloggers and public figures. However, reputable outlets emphasized that, as of publication, no official link had been established between the crime and Esmeralda's internet activity. Back in Mexico, attention to violent crime statistics intensified. Journalists and advocacy groups cited data highlighting a high rate of unresolved cases. Some analysts framed the Ferrer Garibay tragedy as a reflection of a broader systemic issue: the lack of protection for civilians in regions affected by organized crime. Publicly, the case became a symbol of the vulnerability of ordinary families who are not involved in criminal activity, but still end up victimized by it. Local authorities in Guadalajara issued formal condolences to the family and pledged full cooperation with the investigation. Community memorials were organized, including a candlelight vigil near the spot where the truck had been found. The event was peaceful and drew dozens of participants, including neighbors and local media. In the weeks that followed, the story remained a central topic. News broadcasts covered the prosecutor's continued efforts to gather evidence, publications examined potential leads, and online users voiced frustration with the slow pace of the investigation. By the end of September, the volume of public discourse had begun to decline, but interest in the case remained strong among journalists and forensic professionals, who viewed it as an example of the deeper challenges facing law enforcement in Mexico. By early fall of 2025, the investigation into the deaths of Esmeralda Ferrer Garibay and her family was in full swing, though no suspects had been publicly named. The Jalisco State Prosecutor's Office confirmed that all key lines of inquiry remained active, including the analysis of phone records, bank activity, and video surveillance collected during the tracing of the pickup truck's movements. Forensic laboratories had completed the majority of examinations, determining that each victim died as a result of multiple injuries caused by a sharp object. The window of time between the deaths and the discovery of the bodies was less than 12 hours, suggesting the actions were carefully planned and executed. Official statements emphasized that the investigation was being carried out in coordination with federal agencies, as some leads pointed to possible cross-regional involvement. Requests were sent to law enforcement in neighboring states to compare similar cases where identical body wrapping methods had been used. While comparisons revealed certain consistencies in materials and transport tactics, no final conclusions had yet been drawn. Prosecutors noted that the primary motive under consideration was financial, specifically Roberto Carlos Gil Licea's business dealings in vehicle sales and agricultural products. These operations may have led to conflicts with third parties. This theory remained the focus, although alternative hypotheses had not been ruled out. Investigators pointed to the absence of signs of robbery and the selection of the crime location as evidence that the perpetrators acted with clear intent and familiarity with the family's routines. One of the main challenges remained the lack of direct eyewitnesses and a limited body of evidence, much of which had been compromised. A review of the workshop showed signs of cleanup, and many potential clues were lost before forensic teams arrived. Despite these setbacks, forensic experts continued to analyze microtraces, soil samples, and wrapping materials in hopes of identifying their origins. In parallel, digital sources were under review. Extracted data from the family's phones and social media accounts helped establish a timeline of their final days, but revealed no warning signs, threats, or contentious interactions. Cyber investigators combed through messages and online activity, finding only routine, everyday communication. This further weakened the theory that the crime had any connection to Esmeralda's online presence. At the national level, the case was placed under the supervision of the Federal Coordination Center for Citizen Protection Cases. Officials stressed the importance of a comprehensive approach, including a criminological review of areas where interstate criminal networks are known to operate. However, none of these agencies released details about investigative progress, citing confidentiality requirements. By the end of September, several key questions remained unanswered. Who exactly was responsible, where the initial crime scene was located, and whether anyone had orchestrated the act behind the scenes. Despite numerous interviews and technical analyses, no formal charges had been filed. The prosecutor's office stated that while significant evidence had been collected, further expert validation was needed before proceeding. Public attention to the case had gradually declined, though the victims' relatives continued to call for transparency and faster progress. They filed an official request asking for a summary report of investigative actions. Prosecutors confirmed receipt of the request and promised to update the family once lab results were finalized. As of the most recent update, the case remained open. All collected evidence had been archived by the investigative team for continued analysis. At this stage, the identities of the victims, the discovery scene, the likely crime location, and the nature of the injuries had been confirmed, but the individuals responsible and the full motive behind the crime remained officially undetermined.